All right, welcome everybody. With 10 seconds to go, happy to introduce Paul, Kevin, and Vijay for the business operations framework for Module Loop session. Paul, take it away.
Great, thank you, Simeon. So my name is Paul Baker. I'm from Motorsbox, and we're going to sort of take you through the work that we've been doing in this business operations framework workstream. And show you how you can use it and also what we're thinking about doing for the next PI. Before we jump into that, I thought it might be worth reflecting on the name of what we got, because it really does summarize what we're trying to do and what we stand for. This business operations framework. So really, we're about providing a framework for operations at hubs to support them. And there's a couple of themes that come through in that description. The first one is it's about best practice, implementing some best practice in a repeatable way. But it's also about community collaboration. There's a theme of that. And also it's unfinished. What we're putting in place here is something on which we can build. So it's a good starting point. So, and that's certainly a theme that we've been trying to build in here. So community collaboration and a framework with best practice, and something on which we can build. Okay, so let's jump into it. So I thought we could start off with what we had agreed we would try and achieve this PI 13. We had 4 epics that we said we were going to head out and meet. We have met 3 of those. Now, full disclaimer, we haven't quite met it yet, but we're in the final stages of dotting I's and crossing T's. So we certainly hope to have all definitions of done completed in the next sprint or next couple of weeks. So look out for it, but that's it. We've largely met these 3 epics, which I think is a job well done. Okay. So next I want to talk about the team, because there's quite a large team involved in doing this, and we're talking about sort of giving people credit for the work they've done. And largely we would not have been able to achieve what we've achieved without these guys' involvements. And it's not just their dedication, which there was lots of, it's also the expertise that they brought when they came to the table here. So Sam, Vanda, Vijay, Kevin, Len, Yevon, Ivan, Russell, Victor, David, Paul, and Johan, thanks. Good effort. Okay, so let's look at what we did. So there's really 4 parts that I want to talk about. The first part of this is documentation, and documentation is so important because of this. How do you collaborate on a business process? And our business process is much more than the technical implementation that supports a business process. There's organization, there's other stuff. So what better way to collaborate on it than having a set of public documents that are available to the community and that are well written in a general way, and which you can leverage and build on top of, and is available so that everyone can collaborate on. And that's exactly what we've delivered on. So I want to just jump to that quickly and give you a quick whistle-stop tour of it, because I think they're pretty good set of documents that have been put together. So we've got 5 documents that have been added. This we know is not complete, but is a good basis on which we can build. So if we have a look at this technical operations guide, that's the first document we've got in place. If you have a look here, there's lots of business processes underneath that are supporting the technical operations guide that are detailed or specified in detail. And these are processes we know work. So certainly they can be improved on. The documentation can sort of live and migrate, and that's the intention of writing it down. If you write something down, you can extend it and collaborate through it, and that's what we're planning on doing here. So good effort here on the technical operations guide. And next we got the settlement management guide. By the way, we've got a good link to this document. Sorry, let me just copy that to everyone here because you might want to go through this while I talk about it because and then see for yourself. So the settlement management guide, if you thought the Mojaloop settlement was difficult to understand and hard to follow, well, maybe you should come here and have a look because it doesn't have to be. There's very good description on all the different steps and processes, and it's just worth. It's a good place to come to just to get up to speed with all the different steps and processes. That's important. It's an important guide, this. So then our next guide is the Financial Portal version 2. And lots of detail there. It basically shows you how to use that piece of contributed open source code. And then this last part is this role-based access control. Role-based access control is not just the technical implementations, which is definitely part of this work stream. It's more. It's about how you structure your organization, how you set up your roles, how you designate functionality and permissions to certain people. It's really about how you mitigate risk within your organization. And this is definitely a good starting point for that if you're a hub operator and want to get going. And then our last guide that we've got here is around really the steps that you need to go through when onboarding DFSPs into a hub. So these really are a good cornerstone, good basis on which to build your hub operations. And the intention is to sort of collaborate and also make it easier for hub operators to get going and participate in Mojaloop. Now, the next 3 points of this workstream effort was what I'm calling a security bounded context, which is really a production grade build of RBAC implementation. The next one is a sort of reporting bounded context, which is an RBAC enabled backend API on which we can build interactive UIs. And then the third one is UI UX microservice Jamstack atomic deploys that allow independent teams, sort of decouples those teams to produce stuff that can be combined and gives you a high performance and easy to secure deploy. Behind this, there are two of the themes that are worth mentioning. The one is a reference architecture. We're always trying to do new development in alignment with reference architecture. When we haven't been able to, we've definitely documented and specified that and explained the logic behind it. But that is our aiming point, is reference architecture. So that's an important theme. And the second one is varying infrastructures. We understand that we've got the ISC at the moment, but there are other infrastructures out there, and we're certainly planning on incorporating new tools. So the security bounded context of this RBAC implementation that we're building needs to be versatile and be able to work with lots of different identity access management systems out there. And certainly that has been something that we've strived for. In this link, we've got because this work effort is to be a community involved process, we spend a lot of time documenting what we've done, and certainly we publish these documents. In fact, let me just copy that link quickly through to everyone, so you can go through it at the same time. It's quite extensive and really explains a lot of the thinking and the tools that we've used and the design decisions made. I want to just show you quickly so that you understand the extent to which we've gone to here. At a high level, we've got an introduction as to what the BizOps framework is, And then we talk about the reference architecture and the different varying infrastructures that we need to conform with. Then on the security bounded context, we go into detail on what was built and designed, the different roles, the alignment to the reference architecture, functions that are implemented, functions that aren't implemented, and how that design can be migrated into varying architectures. And then go into sort of sequence diagrams and workflows and stuff like that. It's also worth having a quick view at our Orikeeto implementation, which is one of our fundamental tools. I'll get to that in more detail, but it shows you how to call that if you need to check for authorization using the standard API. And then in the Oathkeeper implementation, we also have a lot of documentation and process and define how to set up those rules for to allow access to certain endpoints and how to link permissions to those. And then in the Kratos, and this is the tool that you're going to use if you are using another identity system, and then we've got a lot of documentation on how to configure that and set that up. So there's a rich set of documents here. We've got micro front end, Jamstack design. That's the next big part that we're building. There's documentation to support that, and then similarly for the reporting bounded context design. Okay, let's jump back to that presentation. Okay, so those are the three parts that we built that fit in with the documentation. So let's jump to this view. So I thought it would be worth just a quick recap of what we presented at last convening. This is certainly still part of the vision as to what this BizOps framework is going to look like, but we don't have the new Moduloop version 2 yet, so the actual implementation is slightly different, but certainly along the same lines. So at the top, we've got these portals, different portals that load in the different micro front ends that are then tied to within the same bounded context, sort of experience layers or operational APIs that are being called and then validated through some RBAC mechanism. Okay, let's have a more detailed look as to what we built. So this diagram really summarizes everything that's in place and what we're going to be demonstrating today. So really the production grade RBAC system is where most of the work went, and that is around these tool sets at the bottom here. Ori Oathkeeper, Ori Kratos, Orikeeto, and then some identity access management system. WSO2 is a good example, but there can be Keycloak or any other one that you can think of, dream of. Let me talk about Ori a little bit. So Ori is a sort of a decoupled version of this RBAC implementation, and the more I work with it, the more I like it. This decoupling is quite a powerful concept and makes them very configurable. So part of that is all authorization calls are then given the Orikeeto is the main tool that, is the tool that manages all authorization calls. And it's really useful and powerful to have all that logic sitting in one place in one tool. Then we've got Ori Oathkeeper, which is sitting as the reverse proxy gateway, allowing authorization to certain endpoints. And it does the management to the sort of the introspection of the access tokens to WSO2 or Keycloak, and talks to Ori Kratos. Now, Ori Kratos handles the workflows. That's the login and logout flows and the OpenID Connect flows. But it's worth noting that Ori Kratos is highly configurable and can do many more workflows than that, but also can connect to many different systems. So this is one of those tools in the the choice of the tool is allowing us to be able to connect to almost any identity access management sitting behind there supporting the process. So it's worth going to the documentation and checking it out. It's really a very good tool there. And then obviously we've got the identity access management system itself, which keeps track of the users and then creates the tokens. What other details do we want to cover? So at the top here, this is going to be our first demo that Vijay is going to show us, is this shell application that's going to load up the micro front ends into that portal. It then manages, talks to Ori Kratos and manages that login and logout flow. And Ori Kratos then passes their token on to Ori Oathkeeper, or at least they talk to each other, and then allow that access through on that micro front end to the backend API. So in assigning permission in this RBAC solution, there's a two-step process here, and I would like to just describe that up front. So the first process is the easy-to-use day-to-day assignment that needs to happen. And that is when a new user is created, they'll be created in WSO2. They will then need to be assigned a predefined role, and that can be done through the micro front end, which we're going to show hosted in the solution. And all that's doing is linking the user to a particular role, and that role itself will then have a whole lot of permissions linked to that role. Where the permissions are that link to that role is in fact just designed here or stored here in this CRD, which is a resource file that is uploaded into Kubernetes, and the editing and configuration of that file is managed through GitLab or GitHub or some sort of access management process. So we'll have a full traceability of all changes made to that file. And then this operator really reads from the changes there and reflects that into the Orikeeto, which makes all the decisions on authorization. And in a similar way, we've got our Oathkeeper rules, which define the rules through the Oathkeeper, and we've got an operator that updates Oathkeeper with a set of rules. Towards the middle here, we've got this reporting backend API, which we've also built, which will provide the traceability of a transfer functionality for that microservice. And that, in fact, needs to make certain permissions because it also provides functionality to external DFSP clients. And so it needs to make authorization checks, and that is done through Orikeeto calls. And this is a standard endpoint API endpoint. So back to that initial demo, Vijay is going to give us, we're going to have a look at how we can assign users to roles and how that changes the permission layer through this Ori Oathkeeper. And then, and then maybe how we change the assignments of permissions to roles and how that affects the access points. Just before I jump to the demo, I want to go back to this view because there's another important context that I want to show you, and that is this view. So this view is for different deployments of this security infrastructure. And essentially it's pretty much the same, except Ori Oathkeeper doesn't have to be the gateway or the reverse proxy. It can be tied into a standardized gateway like Ambassador. And it manages the checking with Ori Oathkeeper and the WSO2 introspection or any other identity management token introspection. And then we'll talk to Keto and get that authorization check made. So very similar design between this and the one that we built, and that's on purpose. Okay, Vijay. are you ready to demonstrate some of that to us?
Yeah, sure, Paul. Hello, everyone. This is Vijay Kumar. I am working for Modusbugs as solution architect. I'm here to demonstrate RBAC functionality. Let me share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So, yeah, if we speak in high level, in my deployment, I'm using WSO2 as identity management server. So you can see the admin interface of WSO2 here. There are two users I created. So we create users in WSO2 and manage the roles and permissions through the Kubernetes custom resources. How we did that? Paul explained about all the architecture and the technologies we used, like ORI services. So I'm going to show you the roles and permissions, how we define, and the web UIs to see that in action. So now I have two users, Vijay and Test1, and I assigned admin role to Vijay and user role to Test1. So let's log in with Vijay first. You can see the when I open the micro front-end shell application, it forwarded to the WSO2 identity server. Because there is no cookie, it forwarded to this page, and here I can log in with my credentials. And approve. Then it goes back to the UI. So this is the shell application, and it contains two micro frontends here: roles micro frontend and transfers micro frontend. If we go to rules, so these are the users from WSO2. This is the roles micro frontend. Because I have access to this, I can see this page. And I can do some stuff like add participants to a user, and I can change the role here. And let's go to transfers micro frontend. Here we can see all the transfers. So I have access to both these micro frontends. Let's log in with the other user, which is Test1, from an incognito session. Log in with Test1. Let's go to roles micro frontend. Here you can see the backend service is throwing 403 because I don't have access as Test1. If we go to transfers micro frontend, I can access the data because I have access. So let's see how I define the roles and permissions through the Kubernetes custom resources. So you can see there are two files here, admin role. This is a Kubernetes custom resource. The name is admin role, and here the role ID and the permissions. So there are two roles. So let's see the admin role here. I have two permissions to access reporting API as well as the role API. If we see the user role, I have permission to only reporting API. So let's enable this role API for the user. Let's see what happens. I uncommented this line, and I have to change this resource in the Kubernetes via kubectl apply command. So I'm doing this manually. If we use IAC, then we can change the files in GitLab or something in IAC, and the changes can be tracked later. Okay, so I changed the resource. Let's see that in the lens. You can see the resource is changed here. Now let's try to access the roles API with test1. So this is test1. Let's reload and go to roles. So here I can see the roles because we added the permission. So yeah, that's about roles and permission mappings. Paul, is there anything we need to discuss?
No, I think that's great. So the user interface, you can assign roles to users, and then the backend side, we can assign those permissions to roles. What I haven't explained is why we need to be able to assign participants to users, and that's really because you can also get your settlement reports from the backend API, and this is the permission that is checked for that. So when you give a user access to the backend API that provides those settlement reports, it also makes sure that you got access to the settlement reports for the company that you're requesting those settlement reports for. Great.
Thanks, Paul.
I think that's a good demo. Thanks, Vijay.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, next I want to talk about the second demo. So the second demo is going to be a recording from Kevin, and really what we want to show in the second demo is how you can take advantage or use this RBAC implementation immediately, well, as soon as we finished it. So there's two efforts underway as part of this program. The first one is we are incorporating this RBAC implementation into IAC. That's that automatic deployment infrastructures custom infrastructure as code implementation that we use for setting up modular loop systems. So you'll be able to deploy it as part of that. But in addition to that, we are adding in the micro front-end loading mechanism into the financial portal version 2. So in other words, there's no need to redevelop all of the financial portal version 2 code into the BizOps framework, although that's probably going to happen long term. In the short term, we're going to be loading these micro front ends into the back end of the financial portal version 2, and then enabling the financial portal version 2 to use the same RBAC or production group level RBAC implementation that we've been building at the moment. So this will be this level of scrutiny and security and flexibility will be available in financial portal. And that's what we're going to demonstrate now. So let me just quickly load that. Nope, that's the wrong button. Sorry, excuse me for a sec. Okay. So I'm just going to show you a quick video. Okay, for starters, in this demonstration, we haven't quite tied up the backend reporting API. So that's mock data. But here, the implementation is with a different identity access management piece of software. And so as you can see, the login screen is a bit different. We're showing the login. Now I'm going to pause again. What I want to show you here is You see the settlement, participants, transfers, that's financial pool version 2 functionality. And at the bottom here, we've labeled it micro front ends, so they stand out. These are the new micro front ends that we're pulling in from the BizOps framework. Obviously, we will not call them micro front ends, but we've just labeled it that way for demonstration purposes. And over here, this is mock data, but showing the functionality working for that micro front end. And next we go to the roles API. This is real data going to the backend API. So what I didn't mention is this is using Oathkeeper. It's using Ori Kratos to do the workflow. So all of those parts are in, and it's a proof of concept to show that in fact these tools are compatible. And in the remaining part of this workstream effort, we're going to be completing this and making it available to the community. Great. Okay, so I'm going to jump back to this diagram. So those are the two main demos that we did. There is some work that we haven't completed yet, like I said before, but it is the small pieces, the dotting of the I's and crossing of the T's that still need to happen. Lastly, I thought it would be good to mention what we're hoping to achieve goals for the next PI. Obviously, this is not set in stone, but I think these would be good goals for this workstream effort. The first one is I would like to see this effort go into production somewhere to get used. And that's around finishing the ISC support and also the financial pool version 2 integration. And then and then going live with it somewhere. Then the other two things I would love to see is some sort of community collaboration around the business operations documentation, adding to that documentation that's there. And certainly I hope that that's going to happen. And the last point would be getting other work streams or sort of other work efforts in the community to build on this sort of micro front end functionality and extend the base of what's being offered at the moment. So that's my thought for it. So there's quite a few other people sort of, we got Russell as well, who was instrumental in coming up with that design there, and we got Kevin and VJ. Is there anything else you guys want to add about what we've covered here today? Maybe we can discuss some of the designs that we got up.
No, nothing from me. I think that those demos really encapsulate what we've been working towards. Maybe if anyone can reach questions, we can sort of answer if anybody has any of those, but nothing from me.
Yeah.
Paul, this is Sam. We have a question from Tom. Maybe that can drive another discussion as well. So let me read it out. How do the users and role bindings and cluster role bindings map to the cloud provider users? It's in the chat as well.
To the cloud provider users.
So hi guys, this looks very good and interesting. I was just wondering though, what's the assumption about the users? How do they? Because each cloud platform will have their own user binding to their say Kubernetes engines if somebody implements with that. So I'm not at all familiar with the Ori stuff. I've used Oracle, the OPA, the policy agents, and
Yeah.
So this is all new to me. How does it map? Do you know?
How does it map? Okay, so what Ori's tried to do in the stable is it's broken up what used to be a fairly monolith type implementation of identity access management, and it's broken them down into smaller chunks and distributed it. And that sounds like a strange thing to do until you realize how simple and lightweight each of these components are, which is why I like them so much. So each one of these is separate but lightweight. And what it does is it allows you to tie into some of these solutions. So what we would do is we would just swap out the cloud user access management. We would integrate Ori Kratos into that same infrastructure to look up those users. It's very configurable. It handles OAuth. It handles. It's got a native handling for the sort of Google logins and all sorts of workflows. It's not a huge expertise of mine, but I read through the documentation. So what you would do is you would just sort of tie in Ori Kratos into that solution that you intend on implementing and extending, and then the solution will work there. What is different to other sort of identity access management is normally you manage your user role assignment inside that inside the identity access management system. What Ori Keto, what the Ori portfolio does is sort of not recommend that you do that, and rather do it all the authorization checks and assignments in one place. And the reason is because over time that becomes complicated as your systems evolve, and to be able to make all the decisions in one place in some sort of open scripting language is very, very powerful and extensible, and will cater for all your needs. And that's really what we have with Ori Keto. So I hope that answers your question.
Mostly. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, Paul, Kevin, and Vijay. Lewis here.
Yeah, hi, Lewis.
I have a few questions. I'm curious as to how this lands in the open source, or like how this is accessible for everyone. I know you talked about it getting integrated into the IAC stuff. Would I need to deploy, if I wanted to deploy Mojaloop with all these bells and whistles, and it looks really like they're really nice bells and whistles, would I need to then use the IAC to deploy this? Or is there an avenue, for example, where we might get this stuff integrated into our Helm deployment that you could install most of it from when you install Helm? Like the Mojaloop Helm charts, I should say.
Yeah, they are actually going into the Mojaloop Helm charts. In fact, Vijay, do you want to talk about, we trying to align with the Mojaloop 14's Helm structure. So we've got beautiful. All of these things aligned with that. And really, that's also aligned with easy deployment and infrastructure as code implementation. So we definitely aligning with that effort. Vijay, do you want to just talk about it?
Yeah. So, Luis, we are trying to add the Helm charts in the new format, Mojaloop/charts, and there is a consolidated chart for our testing, so we can use that if we want all these services along with the Mojaloop. So we are working on a separate branch, and if everything is settled, then we are going to merge that to master.
Cool. Yeah, no, that's great. I mainly just wanted to hear how this would be accessible. I think my other question was around WSO2. I know that when I've looked through the docs, you've kind of got the existing sort of architecture diagram hall, and then one that includes WSO2, another one that has kind of moved away from the WSO2 API gateway, if I'm remembering correctly. where does I don't fully understand, how WSO2 fits into this, and if I wanted to deploy without WSO2, for example, what's that? What does that look like?
So WSO2 is not included in the Helm charts. We can point the Kratos to any identity server. If you want to use Keycloak, then you can deploy Keycloak on a separate instance, and we can point to that. It should be OADC. We can use it.
Right.
So in
terms of an API gateway, you could use just Nginx or whatever out of the box.
Yeah. So in my deployment, I used a VM to deploy WSO2 through the Docker. Just for testing. Yeah.
Great.
So that raises a couple of other questions regarding 14, and then what we're going to talk about shortly is testing. So how will you, if you've got this in Helm charts and you're doing it in the V14 format, how are you going to, and we're talking about testing toolkit to make sure everything works. How are you going to test to make sure that the authorizations and the RBACs actually, like, are we going to have a working, you end up doing a Helm deploy or Helm install, and then you should have a working example deployed, or is there still going to be configuration needed on top to test? So how do you know that what you've deployed works? That's what I'm trying to ask.
So in our infrastructure as code functionality, we have something that we call, in fact, I might have the name wrong. What do we call them? Smoke screen tests, which we try and build alongside the infrastructure deployment, where we check that each of the parts are up and running, and we specifically test for particular interactions between the parts to make sure that they're properly aligned. That's certainly something that we haven't completed that part yet, but that is a good approach. Certainly helps it. After deployment, we always run a golden path test, which is the ultimate test, to make sure that all the parts are fit and work together and there's access in the right places. Although the golden path test doesn't go through the gateway at this point, but certainly some of the calls might.
I was wondering. So okay, so you've got this in infrastructure as code, you've got smoke tests, but it sounds like it needs a bit more integration with testing toolkit and with. Okay, sounds good.
I mean, Vijay is middle name is TTK, so we're certainly going to use every effort that we can to leverage that functionality. At the moment, it hasn't been a focus because we've just been trying to get all the pieces together and working.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Great. Are there any more questions?
Paul, something. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I've had plenty of floor time, Miller.
I'll give it back to you in a moment. Just a quick question, Paul. Did you guys address the need for synthetic roles? That is the ability of two identified users in the system to come together to construct a context for the use of the system feature that requires 4 eyes. So this is it's typically done in a way where an authorization must be given by one user in a maker checker role so that the other user can carry out the function. Or it can be done by using the synthetic role concept, which is that a user will temporarily enter a synthetic role upon the coming together of another authenticated user. And then, of course, the functions that can be performed are then subject to checking against the synthetic role, not their original role. So you have the ability to both expand and constrain the functions that that user has while they're in that synthetic role. A backup would be an example, or a manually lighting off a settlement or something that might require supervision. Synthetic role is one way to do it, but I do want to understand more broadly how the 4eyes concept is implemented. Thank you.
Good question. The answer is yes. Well, partly yes, and it wasn't quite part of the work effort that we delivered on here. So we didn't put a lot of time into building it. So some of the community discussions I've had suggest that we really want that functionality to sit in the operational API and enforcement at that level. In terms of being able to implement something that you suggest, Miller, it's certainly possible in that Keto implementation, but it's not something that we've directly implemented here. So if we're looking at this view, having all the authentication in one place certainly allows for that. And there is some level of structure that you can do when defining your roles to enforce that to a degree. To make sure that it cannot be abused, you might want to sort of extend this role permission operator idea to be able to sort of look for permissions that are never supposed to be held by one person, and sort of enforce that at an operator level. So it's not something that we've done directly, but we've certainly got the tools in place to implement something like that if we needed to.
All right. I guess it is a fundamental requirement of systems like this that 4eyes principle is applied as a security control in many contexts. It would be useful, I think, to tap the security team to think of a good working example that would fit within your narrow use cases for demonstration of this functionality, the next iteration. And whatever that is. And then there's several different ways in which the 4eyes principle can be implemented. Synthetic roles is one, where two users come together. One of them survives in the synthetic role and the other is suspended while that synthetic role is activated. And then at the end, the synthetic role is exited, and then the two users they return to their use. Obviously, the hard way to do that is to force the other user off the system and to prevent them from re-entering during that time. But that's awkward. And so I think some iteration here would be useful to think about that. The other, of course, is to do it purely at the application level and to say that an authentication is required from a primary user who will conduct the action, but the action can't proceed until a secondary actor authenticates against that request. And so working out a case where that would be required and iterating on some options for doing that would be worthwhile. It sounds like you have the tools within Keto to implement a synthetic role, but it's not clear that that's the right way to do this. It's just a way that you might consider doing it. And if you're doing this in the other way, which is two users have to authenticate through the app layer, then you have to construct a circumstance where you can iterate on that and demonstrate it. This is the pattern that you would use, for example. I'm not sure exactly that I could point to a specific case you've already designed where you might want to apply 4eyes principle, but I suspect that the people that are iterating on this code here will be able to come up with some ideas there. But it would be very good if we don't delay on that point, because this is a pretty fundamental choice you have to make early in the design.
Yeah.
Just to give some use cases that AVA have, the European Banking Association, adding a DFSP is a simple one. Then adding a supervisor user who can add more users are always good entry points. That's where your control is stretched. And they're fundamental to your first flow here. Easy to link.
There you go. That's a really excellent one. So from a DFSP context, it's not that any random user can add a new user. You're saying that the person who is responsible for managing that user base can do that, but only with the ratification of somebody in a specific additional role. Did I understand you, Rob?
Yeah, adding the DFSP themselves as well, depending if that's comes as a role.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, that's a good one.
That's the easy one. But then also the admin of that new DFSP, making sure there's a transition, that there's two parties taking responsibility. That's the, there's your weaknesses, because you're basically delegating responsibility at that point if you wanted to get a little bit smarter. But I'd see the admin user in the DFSP as a stretch rather than the core, just adding the DFSP with multiple parties just to prevent
there you go.
Happen there.
Yeah, so doing it at the hub and saying the act of adding a new DFSP is a fundamental vulnerability that could be exploited in 100 ways. And so putting an extra control on that with role-based control would be quite useful. And as you say, it's already in scope for the exploration for the admin API. And so it would be a natural one to take on. I will defer to the team to find a good case for it. This sounds good to me though, Rob.
Yeah, I think that's the way forward, Miller, is we need to sort of defer to an identity expert, security expert in this field and come up with a solution that's going to work. I certainly believe we've got the tools in place.
Well, to be clear, I'm not suggesting anyone in the field who might have those skills. I'm suggesting people who are currently iterating on the design, because this will be a requirement for completed work. It will not be possible to deploy the system into production unless you have taken care of this in a designed permissions context. So somebody who has deployed the system will have to design their specific role-based access permission set, and they will need this tool in order to accomplish this. Otherwise, they're running a bit loose.
Okay, great.
I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Miller. Yeah, point noted.
Lewis, did you have a question you wanted to ask?
Yeah, in your presentation, you mentioned there were, with the documentation, there were areas where you weren't aligned with reference architecture, and you documented those extensively. I know we're running out of time, so maybe we have to talk about it at another point, but could you kind of dive into that, even just at a high level, or one or two situations, and kind of, I suppose, explain the rationale?
Okay. So if we looked at the security bounded context implementation, I'm sharing at the moment. Yeah. Okay, good. So there were certain things that needed to happen, and that is, as each bounded context loads, it would go and authenticate itself on startup and login, and would self-login. Obviously, we don't have these different bounded contexts at the moment, so it didn't make sense to implement anything along those lines. We certainly have got the backend API where they can be done.
Yeah. So you're saying it's kind of like placeholder.
It's kind of a placeholder. These are the parts that still need to be built out to sort of complete this security bounded context view. But certainly we didn't go directly against the reference architecture in any way. And this, of course, it didn't make sense to within the current module loop design.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. I guess my point, which I don't need to make, but I will make, is anything, where the point of the reference architecture is to evolve over time. So if there's anything that needs to be changed, then this is a great litmus test for us to I suppose, learn on how do we evolve that reference architecture as we go, I suppose, and get feedback from, I guess, what we have currently, but also what the business cases and the use cases are, because you're obviously, in the weeds a lot more.
Yeah. I really do like the idea of having this reference architecture, and then you organize, when you get a chance to build a new piece, you sort of align it with what's there in a way that makes sense. And then as the parts slowly, each of them evolves, you will get closer and closer towards that implementation. And there's certainly the theme that we try to stick to in this design.
Cool. Thanks, Paul.
Great. Okay. I think I think we're done, unless there's any more questions.
Thanks so much, Paul. I see quite a bit of chat, comments in the chat. Perhaps you can respond there, and we can bring this session to a close here.